أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. In the name of God, most merciful, ever merciful. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليكم مني جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. Respected sisters, dear brothers, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Now that we have established the importance of having a critical mind when it comes to scientific truths and what science provides as the truth, and as we said, given the fact that perhaps we need to take into consideration that science is actually done by scientists and human beings, and that therefore there is always a subjective element, and that science is always progressing and evolving and changing, and that science is an incomplete tool that must be complemented with other fields such as ethics and morals and beliefs. We must therefore be careful when we are receiving information from science to be sure that this is actually coming to us from science and not from an overreach, which we have called scientism. Now that this part is clear, we want to go back to science, so that we do not leave anyone thinking that perhaps we have an aversion towards science, or that we are discouraging people from studying science. So therefore we want to start from the beginning. Does Islam have a very specific position, a very clear set of instructions when it comes to studying science or not? When it comes to the practicing of science or not? Does Islam have anything to say about that? And if so, what has it said? Does Islam encourage or not the study of natural sciences? Does Islam encourage or not the practicing of natural sciences? This is what we're trying to do tonight. In our religion, everything ends and begins with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with God, with the relationship with God. And every instruction that we have, every teaching, every ruling, every dimension of our religion, in fact derives out of our relationship and our understanding of God. And so therefore, before we go any further, we have to start by establishing the existence of God and understanding what kind of God is He. Because everything that we call religion, in fact, derives out of this, stems directly out of this. When we go back to philosophy and religious studies, we see that there is a large number of arguments, of proofs that have been presented to establish the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One of these is called the cosmological argument, to use its technical term. Sometimes it is called the argument of the first mover. Sometimes it's called the argument of the first cause. Sometimes it is called the kalam argument. In Arabic it's called burhan al-huduth. Sometimes it's called burhan al-imkan wal-wujub. All of this comes back to the same idea, which is that when we look at the world, we see that it is made up of all sorts of beings, all sorts of entities. But the common thing that we find in all of them is that they are all in constant change. Which means that if they are in change, it means that they will eventually decay and disappear. And everything that decays and that changes must have come into existence, because it is not in a steady state. It is constantly changing. So what brought it into existence in the first place? In philosophy, we call that an effect. Everything we notice in the world is an effect. And effects require a cause. So if I look for the cause, any cause that I find in the world, and I ask the same questions about it, I will see that it is also constantly changing, it eventually decaying, and itself requiring another cause, and so on and so forth. But from logic, I also know that there cannot be an infinite regress. In what sense? Let's say you have 10 little balls connected together, and you came late, and you notice that the 10th ball has moved. Logically, necessarily, you know that at some point a first ball must have moved to make all the rest of the balls move until the last ball moves. And when I come to the world, I see that the things in this world are actually in change, in motion. They are already effects, which means that infinite regress is impossible. There must have been a first mover, because the world is already in motion. The world is already changing. Therefore, there is a first mover, there is a first cause. This proof was established way before our religion, by the way. We find it in Aristotle and others. This proof in philosophy is considered valid, powerful, and if you go back to the Holy Quran, there are indications of it. You go back to the ruwayat, the narrations, there are clear indications to it. No issues with this proof. Except that, as you can see from my explanation, while there is an element of it that is intuitive, it requires a little bit of a concentration on your part to follow along. That's a first proof. Another type of proof, completely different, also to prove the existence of God that we encounter, has been called by Ibn Sina. He's the one who gave this name to it. It's been called Burhan al-Siddiqeen. It was made popular by a philosopher by the name of Mullah Sadra or Sadruddin al-Shirazi, and made even more popular by Sayyid al-Tabatabai and his students. This proof is what? And you will notice that it's very subtle, very sophisticated, completely different way of viewing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why it's called the proof of the saints, the proof of those who are virtuous, the proof of those who are righteous. What's the proof? They say that when I look at the world, I see that the world is made up of all of these things that exist. They have a level of being, they have a certain existence. Naturally, a human being also wants to, the way the human mind works, is that you always go from those things which are more accessible to you, much more available to you, to the things that are not accessible, more difficult to understand, more difficult to see and grasp. This is how the human mind works, right? You start from the things that are right there to you, easily accessible, to the things that are more difficult to understand. So when we come to the world and we notice things that exist, naturally, the majority of us, what we do is we look at the things that exist in this world. The trees and the plants and the planets and everything in between, ourselves, and we go from these to prove the existence of God. This proof says, this is ridiculous, this is shameful, this is embarrassing, that you have to prove the existence of God with the existence of His signs and His traces. What should be more obvious? The existence of God itself, which gives existence to everything else, or those beings and those existences which are weak and dependent on their existence to His existence? So they flip the equation. And so Burhan al-Siddiqeen says, if we simply focus on this notion of existence, we see only God. God is this pure form of existence, and everything else is a trace, is a shadow of that existence. That's another proof. And as you saw, again, it's a sophisticated proof, maybe a little advanced, requires a lot of nuanced, abstract thinking. The Holy Quran refers to it. You find hints of it in Dua Abu Hamza al-Thamali, Dua al-Sabah, and elsewhere. There are indications of that. Imam Ali alayhi salam, he says, Ya man dalla ala dhatihi bidhatih. O you whose own existence points to his own existence. That's it. You don't need anything outside of God to prove his existence. Right? This is the proof. But again, this is not always accessible to most human beings. And that's not what we're talking about. We're not here listing the proofs for the existence of God, by the way. If you go back to the Holy Quran, as we said, you will find hints, a few verses of the Quran that talk about the cosmological argument. And you will find hints of verses of the Quran that talk about the, what we call Burhan al-Siddiqeen, the saints argument. But the Holy Quran, from beginning to end, has hundreds of verses where it is establishing another type of proof for the existence of God. That is the argument by design, or today increasingly being called the fine-tuning of the world, the fine-tuning of the universe. And the more science is advancing, the more this argument is becoming popular. It's gaining momentum. The more people are realizing that the world is complex, the world is extremely accurate, extremely precise, that it cannot be explained by random chance. It cannot just be explained by matter acting on matter. There's something else going on. And this is again something that should be very intuitive in human beings. If I'm to look at anything around us right now, look at a light bulb, look at these phones, look at this microphone, we see that they are performing a function. This mic does something specific. The light bulb does something specific. A human being who looks at anything that does something specific will conclude that therefore there is an intelligence that intentionally allowed it to perform this specific function. There has to be a level of intelligence that put it together. And the more complex and the more precise, the more intelligence required. If I see a scratch on the floor, I will still think that the scratch came from something, from some effect. But it doesn't look to be something very sophisticated. If I find a book or a building, I will say there's a lot of thought and a lot of knowledge and a lot of power and a lot of will that has gone into creating this thing called a book. Where every letter was chosen, every word was chosen, every sentence was chosen, every page was written in this order, in this sequence. And that's why this argument is extremely powerful. And that's why the Holy Quran uses it in hundreds upon hundreds of verses. And in fact, the Holy Quran and Islam emphasize and focus on this argument for more than just establishing the existence of God. The Holy Quran wants to show that this argument not only allows you to understand nature and it leads you to believe in God, it has the ability, it has the potential to allow you to connect at a very intimate level with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is where you start to see that, in fact, the more you study nature, the more you study and understand natural sciences, the more you can end up with a better relationship with God. This is what the Quran says. So how does this work? Let's take a concrete example. Let's take the human eye. The simple version of the argument is that we come to the human eye and we see that it performs a specific function. The human eye can see. That is proof enough, and we could stop here. A human eye performs a function. It can see. Why can the human eye see? We need to answer this question. This cannot be random. There's too much sophistication, too much complexity in this. But let's take the argument a little bit further to make the point that we're trying to make. The human eye is not just one entity. It's made up of millions of cells working together in a very specific way for the eye to see. And that's not all. These are all cells that are not doing the same thing. Because the human eye has a retina, and the human eye has a cornea, and the human eye has to have tissues around it, and ligaments and muscles around it to keep it in place and to give it a specific shape, to allow the light to enter in a specific way, so that the image of that light is reflected properly at the back of the eye, so that we can see. But that's not all. For all that to work, you need an optical nerve that is able to take that light that has now become a signal received by the cells and take that signal and bring it to the brain. Because we're still not seeing it. And once the brain receives this signal and is able to interpret it in the right way, then we're starting to have a mental image. And that's when your brain is capable of telling you in a fraction of a second, you're looking at a tree, you're looking at a car, you're looking at an image of someone you met 15 years ago. This is incredible. And still that's not all. That alone by itself, it's still not seeing. That human brain has to be connected to a human being who's alive. And for that human being to be alive, they have to be in a certain environment and a certain climate for them to be able to see. And that environment cannot work and exist by itself without being on a planet that allows for that environment to exist. And that planet could never exist if it was not in the right proportional shape and place and distance to the moon and the sun and other planets as part of a solar system, and so on and so forth. And that's why we say, the more you understand science, the more you understand why you are capable of seeing. It's not just about being able to see. That would be a very reductive argument. That's taking something that is very, very complex and simplifying it a lot and saying, the human eye can see. It's not as simple as that. And this is why in science now there is this term called irreducible complexity. You can simplify things up to a certain point, but after that you have to keep all that complexity. You can't reduce it further if you want to talk about that scientific phenomenon. It's irreducible. You can't go in more reduction than this. You have to keep that complexity. That's irreducible complexity that comes from scientists in all those different fields working together, so that we have the full image of why you are capable of seeing. This is one little phenomenon that we notice in the world. Multiply that by how many? How many phenomena are going on like this? All the time, for billions of years. How much fine-tuning is there in all of this? How much intelligence, how much will, how much knowledge is required for all of this to work in this precise, accurate, meticulous way? And that's why this proof is so powerful. One, human beings understand it intuitively. You can understand it at a very simple level, any human being will understand. And you can gain the deepest, most sophisticated understanding of chemistry or physics or biology, and you will understand it at your level too. So it works at all levels. What else? Why is this so powerful? Because it doesn't only prove the existence of God, whereas the other proofs are showing that there must be a God. This proof shows that there must be a God with a lot of these very important attributes. He cannot be an impersonal God who doesn't know that you exist. He's a personal God who has mercy, who has wisdom, who has will, who has knowledge, who has power, and so on and so forth. For him to have put the universe to work in this specific way, with these specific laws. And so you're not only proving that there is a God, but you're also proving that he has specific attributes and traits. And so when we say our religion encourages to study natural science, it's not random. There's a very specific purpose to this. The Holy Quran is filled, as we said, with hundreds of examples. The Holy Quran talks about geology of the earth, talks about weather, talks about the human being, talks about all sorts of animals, plants, the rain, night and day, the earth, the planets, the stars, and so on and so forth. Each one of these the Quran calls a miracle. We tend to call them signs. The real term is miracle. The Quran uses the same word that we would use to say a prophet performed a miracle. This was an ayah. This was a miracle. All of these the Quran calls ayat. They are all miracles. And by the way, that's why the Holy Quran considers every verse of his a miracle. This is an invitation to study every verse of the Quran in that way. It's a miracle. We have to find out what's miraculous about every verse. In any case, the point of this is to say, does the Quran encourage the study of science or not? Yes. One example of this, and we move on. One example is in Surah Al-Imran, chapter 3, starting in verse 189 till the end. Surah Al-Imran is 200 verses. So the last 12 verses of Surah Al-Imran. Every year when I lecture in Muharram, I wonder, for every lecture, do I give homework or not? I call it an assignment or a homework or not. I usually hint to it, but I don't say it explicitly. Now I'm saying it explicitly. If you accept the homework, take that as homework 1. I'm going to have a second one for you today. Homework 1, today after the lecture, when you have time tomorrow, read the last 12 verses of Surah Al-Imran and see what they say. And for those who want to look into the verses a little bit more, I will add one thing for you. You will discover something beautiful about them. You will be able to see the story of Karbala in the last part, the part that I'm not reading now. All the story of Karbala is in those verses. In any case, I leave that to you. From verse 189, chapter 3, 189 to 200. What do those verses say? The verse starts by saying in 189, وَلِلَّهِ مُلْكُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاللَّهُ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ. To God belongs the heavens and the earth. And God is truly powerful over all things. But no, the next verse is going to explain why it's talking about this. It's going to tell us there are people who take great benefit. They derive a very specific application from the fact that the Quran says this. إن الذين يذكرون الله قياما وقعودا وعلى جنوبهم ويتفكرون في خلق السماوات والأرض. The Quran says, yes, everything belongs to God. The heavens and the earth belong to God. But then it starts talking about those who remember God. They are in a state of remembrance of God. Why? First is going to mention their state. And there's a very important point to make here. It says they remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala while in a state of standing or sitting or on their sides. So we would say, in the way we would talk, we would say they remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala while they're going about doing all of their important business during the day. When they're at work, when they're at school, when you're super busy, God is present to you. Those are those people being described by these verses. You never forget God. And when else? And while resting and chilling and doing not much, God is also present there. You don't forget God in that moment either. It's okay to rest and chill and relax, but God is always present. And then, when they're asleep. So how do you remember God when you're asleep? You're not conscious, right? Well, the scholars say there are people who, when you flip in bed from side to side, you say, Ya Allah. God is there. And you remember Him. If you're aware, if you have consciousness, that little moment, God is there. Imam Ali alayhi salam says that should be the first thing you do when you wake up. There's a prayer he says. You thank God for 4 things. You thank God that He brought you back to life from your sleep. And the second thing is, you thank God for making you of those who know Him. That's the first thing. You wake up in the morning and you thank God that I know you. Thank you for making me know you. Simple acts in our narrations. Those who remember God in their sleep. A lot of narrations say, perform a wudu before you go to sleep. That's it. Just by doing that, your bed becomes a mosque, as though you are worshipping all night, even though you're asleep, snoring all night. The Quran, Ahl al-Bayt, the teachings of religion are that simple. This forces you to be in a certain state of mind, that God is always present. It's the last thing on my mind. I perform my wudu, I go to sleep. I wake up in the morning, I remember God. That's it. But this state, in fact, today we would say this is a very mystical state. This is a religious experience. This is the highest form of awareness of God at all times. There are people who spend their whole lives, they study Irfan, Sufism, mysticism, Gnosis, they study Ibn Arabi and they study Mullah Sadra and they study Rumi and so on and so forth to learn all of this. The Quran says, you want to have a mystical experience and a mystical connection with God? The Quran is going to tell you right away. Those people are in constant awareness of God. As a result of what? What did they do? What's so special about them? وَيَتَفَكَّرُونَ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. They reflect upon the creation of the heavens and the earth. That's it. Is this not natural science? Is this not how the world works? That's it. From that, those people are able to achieve this result. And their conclusion from this, we talked a few nights ago about the eyes of the heart. The eyes that see a guidance. Two people look at the same thing, but they don't derive the same guidance out of it. Those people, they conclude from the creation of the heavens and the earth, our Lord, you did not create all of this in vain. There is no way for you, exalted may you be, Subhanak, the verse says. There is no way that a God like you would create all of this creation that we are studying and we are witnessing for no reason, without purpose, without objective. And so the conclusion is, therefore I will act accordingly. I understand that there's a purpose to my existence. You have created all of this for a reason. And the more I study it, the more I reflect upon this creation, the more I realize that there has to be a purpose. This is a religious experience. This is a mystical experience that people look for. The Quran says it comes as easily as reflecting upon the creation of the heavens and the earth. And that's why we said that if you go back to our religion, not only does it say that you should study natural science, it says you must study natural science to get to know God and the kind of God He is. And if you take it to the next level, you're going to have these types of connections and relationships with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let's now go to Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Imam al-Hussein personified all of this throughout his life. We don't have time to talk about the whole life of Imam al-Hussein. So I'm going to focus on one little chapter, one little event from the life of Imam al-Hussein. One of the most important acts of rituals in our religion is Hajj, pilgrimage. History tells us that every year, while Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam was alive performing Hajj, people would wait for Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam on Mount Arafah, on the day of Arafah. This is the climax of the Hajj, the heat of the Hajj. For Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam to come out and recite his famous dua of Arafah, which he would recite every year. So this is homework number 2, brothers and sisters. These are the days and nights of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. I can't tell you the times I am asked, what do I recommend people read to get to know Karbala, to get to know Imam al-Hussein. And we often mention some references. That's fine. I would advise, go back and read Dua Arafah. You will know who Imam al-Hussein is from Dua Arafah. You will know who Imam al-Hussein is from the way he talks to God. You have to read Dua Arafah. If it's too long for you to read in one sitting, read it in a few sittings. Split it up in 2-3 days. But this is the month of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. You have to know what Imam al-Hussein says. And for us, especially on the day of Arafah, inshallah, that this becomes something that becomes of a habit of ours. You have to perform a ziyarah of Imam al-Hussein, whether you are performing the Hajj or not, regardless. You have to perform ziyarah of Imam al-Hussein, and you have to read Dua Arafah. Dua Arafah is beautiful, and in fact it's a little long. It's a masterpiece of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Very detailed. But there's a couple of themes that I want to focus on. One of the themes of Dua Arafah is that it establishes the proofs for the existence of God, since we're talking about the existence of God. A little bit earlier today, I said that one of the most sophisticated, beautiful proofs for the existence of God is Burhan al-Siddiqeen. My opinion is that the best formulation of the entire Burhan al-Siddiqeen is not to go read philosophy works. You can. Go back to Dua Arafah. There are a couple of lines in there that summarize the entirety of its full complexity of Burhan al-Siddiqeen that we talked about earlier, in which Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam starts to talk to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the form of questions in his dua. He tells Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how can we turn to things that are dependent in their existence upon your existence to prove your existence? When did your existence go missing so that we have to prove it by using entities that depend on it? When were you absent? When did you go missing that we have to go looking for you? But this is the God of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. This is those who remember God in every state, standing and sitting in their sleep. What else? Another proof that we talked about is the proof from design, the fine-tuning. At some point, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam starts to talk about something that if you see the list of it, it proves 100% this argument of design, that God exists because of the design of this world. And he focuses on the human body. That's one. I'm going to come back to that in a second. The second thing that he does, and Ahlul Bayt often do this, you find things in philosophy, you find things in religious studies and theology, and you think they're very sophisticated, they're amazing. And then you go back to Ahlul Bayt and you see how much further they go in the argument. They're light years away. The fine-tuning argument says what? The fine-tuning argument says, when we look at the world, it looks like the world was created just the perfect way to accommodate life. No, that's not enough. It looks like the world was created in just the perfect way to accommodate human life, because that's not the same thing. Humans have to be able to exist here. And it looks like the world was created just perfectly for that. No, that's not enough. It looks like the world was created in the most perfect way for human beings to understand the world. That I am able to recognize the patterns of the world, and to derive laws, and to understand how nature works, and to do math that gives me very precise equations that can predict when an asteroid will hit Earth, what will happen in 10 billion years, what happened 5 billion years ago. This is quite a coincidence that this all happened for absolutely no reason, without purpose, by complete chance. Okay, this is the full force of the argument of the fine-tuning of the world. Imam al-Hussein takes it further in Dua Arafah. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam says, it is as though the world is created perfectly, not for life in general, not for human life in particular, not so that human beings understand the universe fully. It is as though the world is created perfectly for me as an individual. You, my God, with your full might and your full knowledge and your full power, you've created all of this in the most perfect way for me specifically to exist in it. And you have taken me out into this world at just the right time, with the right set of circumstances for me to deal with this world. This is what Imam Hussein says, word for word in Dua Arafah. He says, you have taken me at this point in time, in this point in history. And so Imam Hussein alayhi salam wants to thank God. So he tells Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I wish I could bear witness with my entire being. And he talks about 3 categories of his entire being. All of my mind and my beliefs and my values and principles. And every single little body part of mine. And I'm going to come back to that in a second. And thirdly, all of my actions, all of my behaviors, all of my acts of worship. All of that together makes who I am. This is a very long passage in Dua Arafah, by the way. The Imam gives a very lengthy description. And he focuses on the second part. The second part is the body parts. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam starts from the top of the head. For those who have studied or are interested in biology and anatomy, go read Dua Arafah just for that purpose. See the description Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam gives of the human body. How he describes the skull, how he describes the eye and how it is attached in place with muscles and ligaments and tissue. How we grow up in the womb. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam tells Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this dua, and you have positioned me, you have placed me in 3 darknesses in a womb to protect me and feed me. And I grew up in that womb until you took me out of that womb into this world, and I had nothing to do with it, with any of it. You took care of all of that. And you brought me into this world, and you provided food and sustenance and care for me. Now al-Hussein alayhi salam says, and you filled the hearts of those who take care of me with love and tenderness towards me. And you made me grow, and you provided for me until my mind developed and I started to understand the world. And it developed further and I started to understand your guidance for me. And Imam Hussein alayhi salam says, and in return, I disobeyed you and I committed sins against you. But your provision and your mercy and your sustenance did not stop. You continued to provide it for me. And so I continued to receive it. Then Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, alaykum as-salam wa rahmatullah. Then Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, after all of this, he says, so I bear witness, my God, that if I were to spend my entire life, and if I were to live for centuries, if I would spend that entire time trying to repay you and to thank you for one of these favors, I would not be able to. That's the point of that entire passage of the Imam. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam here, he is taking us from, first of all, establishing that my entire being believes in you, my God. And 2, that you are worthy of worship and you are worthy of praise and gratitude. But 3, the Imam is establishing the proof from design that we talked about. The Imam is saying that if you were to take the bone of a human body, if you were to take my bone, my tissue, my ligament, my nerve, my vein, my artery, my eye, my heart, my rib. By the way, the Imam mentions all of these in detail, much more detail than I'm saying right now. He's saying each one of these is praising you. Each one of these is recognizing your worth, recognizing you as my God. Is this not a call to study science? Is this not a call to connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through natural sciences? And if we go, this is how Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam lived his normal life. And in his moments of need and difficulty and hardship, the Imam did not change. There are human beings who crumble. There are human beings who fall apart when they are faced with difficulties. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, the more difficult things got, the more sublime he becomes. His excellence shows more and more. On the 10th of Muharram, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam starts by praying, performing the dawn prayer with all of his followers and companions. Brothers and sisters, Karbala is about prayer. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam not only performed his prayer in Karbala, he did not delay the prayer. Zainab alayhi salam performed not only obligatory prayers in Karbala, she performed all her recommended prayers in Karbala. A follower of Imam al-Hussein, a student of the school of Karbala, cannot neglect their prayers. Prayer has to be present in your lives. Live the life of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Imam al-Hussein performs the prayers, then he turns towards the enemy. After he gave his clear instructions to the leaders of his army, he assigned so-and-so on the right, so-and-so on the left, so-and-so in the middle. He gave them each their instructions and their banners. He looked to the enemies, and there's an ocean, tens of thousands of soldiers ready to attack him and his few companions and family members. What does Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam do? Karbala is about to start. The saga that is Karbala is now about to start. How does Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam begin Karbala? In the same way he ended Karbala. Imam al-Hussein began it with a connection to God. He began it with a dua. This is an important dua. We must learn it. We must repeat it. We must learn it because it's Imam al-Hussein and we commemorate him. Out of love of Imam al-Hussein and respect for Imam al-Hussein, we should learn this dua. And if Imam al-Hussein recited it in his hour of difficulty, we can recite it in our times of difficulty and struggle and hardship. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam teaches his followers to recite this dua. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, what did he say? Allahumma anta thiqati fi kulli karb, wa raja'i fi kulli shiddah, وأنت لي في كل أمر نزل بي ثقة وعدة كم من هم يضعف فيه الفؤاد وتقل فيه الحيلة ويخذل فيه الصديق ويشمت فيه العدو أنزلته بك ففرجته وكشفته فأنت ولي كل نعمة ومنتهى كل رغبة. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam turns to God and he tells him, My Lord, you are the source of all of my confidence when I face struggles. You are the source of my hopes when I feel difficulties. And you are the one that gives me strength every time I have to feel and I have to deal with a hardship in this world. How many worries has this life presented to me? And every time, it is to you that I turn. And it is to you that I complain. Difficulties that make the heart weak, the Imam says. And they make the options few. And those who are close to us go away. And the enemies rejoice when they see us in difficulty. But it is only to you that I complain. And it is only to you that I present these difficulties. And you have removed them. And you have eased them. So once again now, I am presenting my difficult matter to you. And this is the matter in which Karbala begins. This is the connection of Imam al-Hussein to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allow me to end very quickly by going back, since we mentioned it. Going back to Dua Arafah. We gave a couple of reasons why Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam gives this very lengthy list of body parts in Dua Arafah. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam describes his skull, his eye, the ligaments, the bones, the joints, the arteries and the veins and the muscles. The Imam describes every part of the human body. And perhaps he is telling Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala all those years in Dua Arafah that, my Lord, these are all the body parts that I will serve you with in Karbala. These are all the body parts that I will sacrifice for your sake in Karbala. Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. Assalamu ala al-Husayn wa ala Ali ibn al-Husayn wa ala awlad al-Husayn wa ala ashab al-Husayn wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin.